Hi, and welcome to another edition of AI Impact and Strategy. Yesterday, I gave a talk at a conference in Finland, although I was here in New York, so obviously I did it over Zoom. The conference was about business models, and I've been really interested in the topic of business models for a long time. In fact, a few years ago, I wrote a book about it. And now I was very interested to explore the relationship between AI and business models because obviously the impact of AI is tremendous throughout society, no less so on our business models, how it is that businesses are organized and operate, and how is AI changing all that? Well, it's changing it in a lot of ways. So I use this talk as a way to think some of those topics through, and I found it really interesting, as well as two really excellent questions that came up afterwards. And I was happy to explore those as well. One on the ethics of AI, and a second on the data of AI and how AI is using and relies on data and what that means. Hope you enjoy the talk and the conversation that followed. So, hi everybody. The view behind me is where I live in New York. Not now, but in the fall when the colors start to change. It's probably just as pretty there in Finland, and I wish I was there with you. But I appreciate that they've organized an opportunity for me to share with you virtually. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. I have a lot of ideas that I want to share with you. So hopefully you can see my screen. It says how AI is changing your business model. Does that show up? Yes. Okay, fantastic. I realize that you all are quite knowledgeable about business models and you already know all this, but for the sake of completeness and to make my presentation clear, I want to just start with a definition. So a business model at a simple level is simply how you make money. But very importantly, it's how you deliver experiences to your customers. And it's how you use all kinds of methods and tools, products and services, technology, your supply chain in order to compete in the marketplace. And therefore, it's really a core element of how you differentiate your company or your organization. And what that means is that it's a competitive situation. So if your competitor comes up with a better business model, then what? You have to ask yourself that strategic question. And then, of course, we get into the question of business model innovation. In business model innovation, we visualize like this. There's something that happens outside. That's delivering experiences to your customers. There's the communications in between, which is how you communicate in your brand. And then there's everything that you do inside the organization, your products and services, your capability, your supply chains, marketing, how you monetize, and your management. Those are the elements that you can manage inside the organization in order to deliver experiences on the outside. So just as an example, let's take a look at the food industry. Here are 9 different food industry business models. Up in the upper left, you can grow your own food, or you can go to a grocery store or a super center like Walmart in the upper right. There's fast food in the middle left, and then there's a very fancy restaurant in the middle. And then there's a coffee shop like Starbucks in the middle on the right. But maybe you're in a hurry and you just want to grab some street food, that's the lower left, or you want to get a pizza delivered to your house, that's in the middle on the bottom, and that's a robot delivering the pizza. Or you want someone to deliver it on a bicycle or a motorcycle, that's Grubhub. So these are 9 very different ways that you can get food. Each of them is a different business model because each of them use a different mix of productivity, capability, supply chain, marketing, monetization, and management. Each is a different experience, and you may choose one or the other depending on your situation at any given time. So the question that we want to explore today a little bit is how does AI change how you deliver experiences? AI being, of course, a very transformative force that's pretty much changing everything about business and society. And so just to start the conversation about AI, I'll ask rhetorically, why should we care about AI? Well, one reason is because there's so much money being thrown into it. So in 2025, just these 4 American companies are investing roughly $125 billion in AI technology. The US government is investing more than 500 billion. The EU is investing at least 200 billion. The Chinese government is investing an unknown amount. And all of these entities, companies and governments, think that AI is going to be a big deal. And I think that they're right. So let's see how that big deal is unfolding. I'll start off with an example from a tire company. Yeah, Michelin, the French tire company, is using AI extensively, in fact. And they saved 50 million euros in 2024 by implementing AI technologies and systems. And their goal is to save 500 million euros by 2030, which is going to be a significant percentage of the company's profitability. So AI is having a fundamental impact at an industrial company, Michelin. Some of the ways that that's happening are through machine vision, logistics, the supply chain, quality control, marketing, forecasting, and even geopolitical simulation. So Michelin is using AI in all of these applications to change how the company operates at a fundamental level. So what this means is that AI is changing the tire industry. Now, I learned all this because a friend of mine is the chief data and information officer at Michelin, Yves Cassot. And I interviewed Yves a few months ago, and he shared all this information with me. I then published it on a YouTube video, and hundreds of people have watched it because people throughout the tire industry are very interested in what Michelin is doing, since Michelin is considered one of the leading companies in the industry. So here's an industrial leader applying AI in order to change the company, to change the profitability profile of the company. And as you saw, 500 million euros is a very ambitious target. And I think they'll probably get there way before the year 2030. Now, another company you're familiar with, Amazon, is using AI extensively. And so I used AI to find out how Amazon is using AI. And this is what my AI told me. It says Amazon's using it for e-customer and customer experience, for operations and logistics, for sustainability, and for web services. And it gave me a very, very detailed rundown. This is Google Gemini that I was using. Here's the full report that it gave me. I'm just scrolling it up. I realize that you can't even see it or read it. But the point here is that AI is a powerful tool that's helping me understand how AI is being used in a company that uses a lot of AI. One final example, AI in science. In 2024, I'm sure you're well aware because Norway is not that far away from you guys. AI won the Nobel Prize in Science and Chemistry in 2024, along with 3 people. It's true that the 3 people got the award, but the AI did the work that made it possible. That's AlphaFold protein structure database developed by Google DeepMind and a European lab. So what does it mean when AI makes it possible for scientists to win the Nobel Prize? It means that AI is completely changing the field of science, just as it's changing e-commerce, just as it's changing industry. The CEO of Google DeepMind, which is based in London, says that AI is the ultimate tool to accelerate scientific discovery. So here are some of the characteristics of AlphaFold 3, which is their program. Highlighted in red there, it's thousands of times faster and cheaper than doing science in a lab. So at the bottom, 99% of the scientific work is done in silicon, i.e. in AI and simulation modeling. And then 1% of it is validation in the lab. So this is a complete transformation of science. It means that science is now progressing at digital speed. And as science speeds up, that means that the rate of change in society is going to speed up. So in a sense, science has a new business model based on a new capability. And that raises the question, is AI a new tool or is it in fact a new category of tool? And of course, I would suggest that it is indeed a new category of tool because it enables us to do things like pattern recognition and problem solving and system modeling to a degree that we could never do it before. AI provides us literally with a new capability. And it's being used in all of these industries at the highest levels. So whereas once we were worried that AI would disrupt the economy by displacing workers at the lower levels of the economy, in fact, what's happening right now is that AI is being used at the highest levels of the economy, people who have the most education. In fact, if you're a PhD now, you have to be using AI. There's simply no choice because AI changes how we do the most advanced knowledge work in society. And it's leading us to original insights. So that means that AI is changing how we think, It's changing how we work, how we solve problems. It's changing the problems that we even try to solve, which means it's changing the economy. It's changing all the professions. And so, sort of in a general way, we could say AI is changing everything. And sometimes that's a little scary because it's changing it in ways that we don't like. But apparently, there's not much that's going to stop this train. So we have to understand it in order for us to be able to control it and management. So the head of the American Medical Association, that's the association that represents 1 million doctors in the US, he said last year, AI will not replace doctors, but doctors who use AI will replace doctors who do not use AI. So AI is transforming medicine, just as it's transforming all the other industries that I listed on the previous slides. This is a pretty powerful thing for the head of the AMA to say. The AMA is known as a very conservative organization. Its job is to protect the incomes of doctors, essentially, to make sure that they're making a lot of money in the US, which they do, and AMA does it very well. But here he's talking about a fundamental change in the profession. I saw this ad recently when I was using Google Gemini. So Google has this thing called Canvas. I'm zooming it in now, so maybe you can read it. It says you can make games from scratch. AI will code your program. So AI will write programming for you. You don't even need to do it yourself. All right, so now back to the business model. So here are the 6 elements of the business model. And of course, this is a bit of a summary. You could identify potentially more elements that compose any organization's business model. For the purposes of just as a thought experiment, this is a pretty good summary of what AI will be able to do, because it's going to enable us to innovate in all 6 of these categories. So how do you produce products and services? Well, AI is changing how organizations function, because it does now intellectual work in science. It does manual work. I showed you a picture of Amazon. Amazon has about 750,000 of those robots. An AI super user who I know named Tom Brazil says that AI is improving his programming by a factor of 20. He's 20 times more productive as a programmer. And I showed you Michelin before. Well, Michelin has about 100 manufacturing plants around the world, and 100,000 people in those plants are using AI every day. That's how they're getting those savings. So it's fundamentally changing how we produce products and services in industry, in intellectual work, in science, in programming work, in every aspect of the economy. It changes what we can do. That's what the Nobel Prize story is all about. The fact that you can win a Nobel Prize because AI enabled you to do some chemistry that you could not do before means that it has fundamentally changed your capability. So all scientific fields are now going through a very quiet but very profound revolution. And so are businesses. Supply chains are among the most complicated elements of any business, and AI-enabled supply chains are providing efficiency gains of even up to 10%, which in the logistics industry, 10% is enormous. It's a huge, huge difference. And it's able to do that because AI can help us manage complexity. The shipping industry, for example, which moved 12 billion tons of goods in ships through 400 ports and on and off of 100,000 ships around the world and through hundreds of thousands of warehouses. So AI is changing marketing too. Meta, which is Facebook, has recently created an AI ad tool that automates all forms of marketing on Facebook. What that means is super customization, which potentially means that customers are going to stop paying attention to generic advertising, because on Facebook they can get super customized advertising. And even if we're not just automating the whole process, AI is helping to change how we communicate with customers, because it's enabling us to know more about customers and to provide customized experience to everyone. Anyone involved in marketing is now thinking about AI and possibly using AI. And then there's the issue of monetization and asset management. So monetization means, what do people pay you for? So historically, they paid for products and services. A business that I know about called Fixing Us has a big database of video. And they discovered that they can sell access to analysis of the video. And that's worth more than the videos that they used to sell. So it's changing the way they make money. And that's true throughout the economy. AI is changing what people will pay for and why they will buy it. And the last element in my formula management, well, it's changing how people make decisions. So management is the effort to attain competitive advantage, and a business model is a scheme to achieve competitive advantage. That was my definition from the very beginning. And AI is affecting all of it. Now, for example, we can simulate the performance of a complex system like our business. And whereas we used to do scenario planning and run 3 or 4 scenarios, now it's very common for organizations to run 3 or 4 million scenarios because they can do it using AI. And again, it's this capacity of AI to recognize patterns in complexity that is transformative across all of these facets of business model innovation. So it's changing our efficiency profile, and it's therefore changing what we mean by productivity, and it's changing how we achieve profit. So AI in business models, yes, it's a real thing. AI is a transformer, it's a disruptor, it's a way to achieve competitive advantage, and for those organizations that lag behind, it's a matter of competitive survival. You have to use AI now in order to be competitive in most markets, in most industries. So we visualize this with what we call a market map. Imagine that the red square is the total addressable market. This is all of the possible customers that we could reach. And on one axis, we say we want to differentiate. So if we're going to go toward the top of the map, we're going to provide more luxury. And if we're going to go toward the right side of the map, we're going to increase the size of the market. So it's just a simple way to visualize the two fundamental aspects of business: customization on the vertical and mass market or commodities on the horizontal. So what this tells us is you want to stay out of the lower left-hand corner. Small market, no customization, that's the death zone. No customers are there. But in contrast, the sweet spot is going to the upper right-hand corner of the market. Now, we use this as a very simple way to analyze all kinds of markets. You can pretty much plot any industry or any company on here and see what their strategy is, and then see how they can use innovation to improve their strategy. Very clearly, you have 3 strategic options. You can try to become more customized, more differentiated, more like a luxury. Number 2, you can try to do both customization and increase the market size, which is tricky. Number 3, you can make it cheaper, like Walmart, by going into the commodity market. And the 4th option, the 4th direction, clearly you don't want to do that. So that's not an option. So what we see is AI is changing the structure of the market because it's enlarging the total market. It's making it possible to do extreme customization, and that's enabling us to reach everyone. So the market's getting larger, and AI is a driver of the structure of the market, which means that companies are using AI to provide more customization. That's exactly what Meta and Facebook are doing with their ad tool. But they're also using it to decrease the cost. That's what AI is doing in supply chains. So AI is literally changing the structure of the market. And the companies that understand this soon are basically like Michelin, trying to apply these capabilities across all facets of their business in order to increase their market share, lower their costs, increase their profitability, and increase their brand image among their customers. So AI is essentially enabling a company like Michelin or Amazon or Facebook to do all those things at the same time. Back to a slide I shared with you a little earlier, follow the money. So this is why so many organizations and governments are investing so much money in AI, because it is literally changing the structure of the economy, and they realize it. And where it's headed is pretty dramatic, because today's AI will be the worst AI you will ever use. Because tomorrow AI will be better, because it's getting better every day because of the competitive nature of the AI provider marketplace. All these platforms are competing with each other to make it better and better, to make it easier and easier to use and more powerful. If you use AI tomorrow, it'll probably be better than today. And in a week and a month and a year, it'll be transformatively different than it is. So this is a very hard industry to keep up with. What's behind all this is the information revolution and the digital power of computing, plus communications, plus storage. Computing is roughly doubling in power every 18 months. Communication is roughly improving every 9 months on a doubling basis. Storage is doubling every 12 months. And AI is improving at a rate of about 10x per year. So when you multiply all of these factors together, you're looking at a rate of exponential change that reduces the cost of computing by 95 to 97% every 10 years. And then when you add AI's capabilities to the reduced cost of computing, what you get is a global revolution. And that's what we're experiencing today. We also have to recognize that it's not just AI. All of these other technologies are coming along at the same time. Of course, robotics relies on AI, but virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, 5G and 6G communication speeds, big data. Oh, yeah, and then quantum computing, which is another fundamental technology, which isn't quite mature yet, but in 5 to 10 years will have major impact. And then blockchains and drones and all the stuff listed at the bottom. So all these technologies are maturing at more or less the same time. So whereas AI is sort of our focal area because it's so visible and it's so prominent, all of these technologies together are creating a revolution. So we think of it as a big wave of change, and we think of it as a storm, and in fact, it's the perfect digital storm. So the idea of a perfect storm comes from a book and a movie that was written about 20 years ago that talked about this huge storm that created waves that were hundreds of feet tall. Well, that's what technology is about to do to society. It's creating huge waves of change that are hundreds of feet tall and that are transformative. So I've talked today about what AI is doing today, but imagine it's 10 times more powerful or 100 times more powerful. What impact will it have on business and business models tomorrow? Well, it'll be decisive. And it'll change the structure of how we think about business models as well, because in the future, like this afternoon or tomorrow, the customer is no longer just the customer is the partner, because the customer is the co-creator. AI enables the customer to be a co-creator with the company. And therefore, you create value not by just producing products and services, but by what you do together, but by what the company and the customer create together. And that means that the relationship is constantly changing because you're constantly creating. And that's because knowledge is continuing to grow. And of course, AI is accelerating how knowledge is growing. And therefore, each relationship between the company and each customer is unique. Across the entire economy, we're seeing that this formula is starting to emerge. Right? Well, this changes pretty much everything. So those were some of the key ideas I wanted to share with you. I see that you're still all sitting there, so I guess you didn't get up and leave. I guess that's a good thing. I wanted to share with you some resources that we've created to help you think about all this. These are fascinating topics, and I and colleagues have been thinking about it for a while. So we recently published the two books on the left, The AI Nation and The AI Future. These are about how AI is changing the world. And then the one on the right, Business Model Warfare, is a book that I wrote a few years ago about how to think about your business model. And obviously we need to combine the thinking, and that'll be our third AI book, which is coming along. It's called The AI Enterprise. And we'll talk a lot about what I've shared with you here, which is how AI is changing business models. I also have a YouTube channel called AI Impact and Strategy, where I interview people who are using AI, and they're on the top row. You can see 3 interviews I've done with Yves Cassot and Michelin. If you want these slides or you want to get in touch with me, please go to my website. There's a place for you to connect with me there, and you can sign up for our newsletter so you can find out about all the cool stuff that we're doing. And with that, I will say thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. I'm glad that I was able to share this. I hope you found it interesting. And if you do go to the website, please share with me any feedback you have. I'd love to get your thoughts about what I shared with you today. With that, I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you for this great presentation. I just have a quick questions. Looking at what you're presenting, there was a huge, raise up of use of AI in different industry. I just would like to know from your perspective, from your knowledge, what will be the impact on the ethics, or the ethics in business, the ethics in education, the ethics in qualifications?
Yeah, AI is a huge challenge to how we think about ethics and morality. We're already seeing how AI systems are lying. They're creating falsehoods. They have the power to manipulate through deepfakes and other technologies. So I could spend another hour or two talking about the challenges of ethics in AI. And I'm sure you've had many conversations like that. One of the major challenges that we face when we think about the ethics of AI is that societies in general, we just go ahead and do stuff and then we worry about the consequences later. The EU tends to be much more thoughtful. And so, for example, you have the GDPR in the EU, which is a much more stringent privacy protection regime than we have anywhere else in the world. So what we do in the US is we create technologies and then we worry about the consequences later. And there are clearly going to be very severe consequences for AI. And there is some discussion about it, but clearly the discussion is lagging behind the technology. And so the reason that those companies are spending all those billions of dollars is because there's a huge competitive advantage to be had. And the ethics question simply trails along later. In the US, what we tend to do is we create technologies and then they create problems. And then we either create legislation or we create litigation in order to try to resolve it. But the legislation and the litigation always lag behind. So in this case, I think we're looking at some very dangerous scenarios. And we in the US who are paying attention to these questions will be looking very interestedly at what's happening in the EU because the EU is likely to implement ethics regimes much more quickly. So the simple answer is it's going to be a huge problem. No one has solved it yet. And it is potentially going to lead to some very negative outcomes that we're going to have to deal with in order to figure out how to use this technology appropriately. I wish there was a better and more optimistic answer, but honestly, I'm not that optimistic simply because of the amount of money that's involved and the amount of power that's involved, both for companies and for nations.
Okay, thank you. There's still one question, Charles.
Langdon, a great talk. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Great.
Clearly, AI is going to create competitive advantage. My question circulates around for whom? You gave the wonderful example of Michelin. I'm a little bit concerned for Michelin that the AI's tools that they use, the owners of the AI will just take the data and use it better elsewhere, and other companies will benefit later. So in thinking about competitive advantage, should you be first to use it? Should you be second? Should you be worried that all the competitive advantage is not going to come to you, the user of the company, but actually back to the AI system? How have you unpacked that question, which has been worrying lots of people? What's your insight into that paradigm, that worry that people have? Who's getting the competitive advantage?
You brought up a great topic, which I didn't touch on at all, which would be another half hour or another hour, which is the data. You're absolutely right. What's happening with data is the enabler of AI. And so actually, there's a chapter in one of those two books, AI books, called Data is Power. It's the last chapter in the AI Future book, because those who own the data now have the power. So I know how they handle it at Michelin because of my discussion with Yves Cassot. And the way they handle it is everything is kept inside. They are not using third-party AI systems that are connected to the outside world. Everything is protected within their company firewall, precisely for the reasons that you describe. So it was a bit of a surprise to me that Yves was as open as he was when he and I were discussing. And very quickly, the interview that I put on YouTube was picked up by a lot of the tire industry media. And so the reason that it has, hundreds of people have watched the video because the tire industry discovered that the video existed and they publicized it because all the competitors wanted to know what Michelin was doing. I mentioned Yves' title. He's Chief Data and Information Officer, right? So data is in his title. Managing the data becomes the critical thing. I'm sure you all know that it's data that enables AI to exist. Large language models are trained on data, and the capacity of AI to win the Nobel Prize, for example, is because of the scientific data that they were able to feed into their AI system. So what that means is that data protection becomes a critical competitive factor. It becomes very interesting when you think about that in relation to an organization like Amazon, because they have access to the customer data from billions of people now, and that's enabling them to gain competitive advantage. And so what that suggests, I think, is that those who scale their access to data most quickly are going to gain competitive advantage. And so to answer the question that you put out directly, is it better to be first or second? It is absolutely better to be first because you're going to get more data faster. But you have to protect that data in order from a competitive standpoint. This also has interesting consequences for a nation. So the first of those two books that I showed you was called The AI Nation. We wrote that book because we were working with the national government on their AI strategy. And we discovered that we needed to educate the government's ministers about AI and the implications of AI. So a national data strategy becomes a competitive factor for a nation. I'm sure you will soon, if you're not already hearing about an EU data strategy, just as we will have a national American data strategy, and the Chinese and the Japanese and everybody else will have a national data strategy. And that means, how can we take the information that we have about our society and use that in our society? For example, in the UK, they have a national health system, which has health records on 60 or 70 million Britons for decades. And that's a powerful tool for improving the public health throughout the UK. Again, it all depends on the data. But if those data got into the wrong hands, that would be a social, an economic, and a cultural disaster for the UK. So the existence of that database becomes both a critical factor for improvement, but also a critical vulnerability. So now we're back to the ethics question, right? So the data and the ethics and the power of these tools really speaks to one of the words that I mentioned early in my presentation, which is disruption. Everything is going to be disrupted. Everything is in the process of being disrupted. The point of, I think, of your question, which I completely agree with, is we have to be willing and ready to rethink all of these factors down to a fundamental level, because AI and all the associated technologies in the perfect digital storm are going to require us to rethink how we organize society. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Enjoy your evening in Finland, and we'll enjoy our day here in New York.